Hello and welcome to India's World. Tensions continue to rise in the Korean peninsula with expectations of a sixth nuclear test by North Korea. Pyongyang's continued pursuit of nuclear and missile development has become a headache not only for its neighbors but for the world. After withdrawing from the six-party negotiations on denuclearization in 2008, North Korea has relentlessly pursued nuclear development unchecked by any international constraints. US President Donald Trump has offered to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un if the conditions were right. However, he has also not ruled out preemptive military strikes. The election of Moon Jae-in as President of South Korea has complicated matters for the Trump administration. Moon does not share the US hardline on North Korea. He wants to follow a path of dialogue and reconciliation rather than of preemptive military strikes. Besides South Korea, China and Japan also feel threatened by North Korea's nuclear and missile program. President Trump has offered China a favorable trade deal if it helps denuclearize North Korea. But he has also said that the US was willing to go it alone if China refused to help. To discuss the turbulent situation in the Korean peninsula and the challenges of dealing with a nuclear North Korea, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Skand Tayal, distinguished diplomat. He has served in Indian missions in Sofia, Warsaw, Geneva and Moscow. He was India's ambassador to Uzbekistan and to the Republic of Korea. We are lucky to have with us Ambassador Meera Shankar, another distinguished diplomat. She was India's ambassador to Germany and to the United States. And we have with us Dr. Jabin, an expert on China. He is a fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies in New Delhi. I welcome you all to this discussion. Ambassador Tayal, let me begin with you. Tell us, why does North Korea want nuclear weapons and why does the world feel that it should not have them?
See, North Korea is de facto a nuclear power already. Now, what it really wants is miniaturization of the nuclear weapon and strike capacity on mainland United States. It can already strike parts of Japan and maybe Hawaii also. And this is really to ensure its regime survival and the very existence of North Korea as it is at present. So that desire is there, which has been with his father also, Kim Jong-il, and the same course he is pursuing, and it will be very difficult for the world to stop him from pursuing that course.
Master Shankar, do you think that the threat of military action will help the North Korean regime to recognize its existential choice between survival or nuclear status?
Well, the threat of military action, I think, is more likely to induce China to exert pressure on North Korea than for North Korea to really take this into its calculus, because it calculates that it can retaliate against both South Korea as well as Japan. A new element here is that the United States has deployed anti-missile defense systems in both countries. They have deployed the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, THAAD, in South Korea, and they've deployed the Aegis anti-ballistic missile ship-based defense off the coast of Japan. But how comprehensive these ballistic missile shields are is still something to be discussed, whether it is targeted to saving cities or it is a comprehensive shield, I think is something which is not very clear. But clearly what is happening is that the threat of US military action, with President Trump saying, either China helps or the US is prepared to go it alone, would make the Chinese more inclined to exert economic pressure. And they have almost 80 to 90% of the trade with North Korea, which is under sanctions. China has imposed, has cut off coal imports from North Korea, and in articles it has threatened that it will impose, it's prepared to impose an oil embargo. The North Korea has reacted quite strongly against this, saying China has acted with insincerity and betrayal and warning of consequences.
Dr. Jacob, is the threat of military action against Korea really a point of pressure on China, one? And two, of the two possible scenarios, a nuclear North Korea or an external military intervention against North Korea, which one is better for the region and the world?
Well, to start with your second question, look, as Ambassador Tayal mentioned, North Korea is a de facto nuclear weapon and nuclear weapon state, and nobody is going to be able to take those weapons away from them. And the North Korean regime calculates that these weapons are essential for regime survival. So, you know, we can't deal in hypotheticals here. As to the question of whether military pressure on North Korea is effective, I would say no, because the Chinese will only move up to a point. They are certainly worried that, you know, I mean, they certainly blame the North Koreans for bringing the THAAD defense systems to South Korea. And because THAAD doesn't really only affect North Korea, it also affects Chinese missile defense capabilities as well. So, I think that is something that the Chinese are now beginning to get their head around, that, you know, whatever North Korea does has consequences not just for the Korean Peninsula, but also for China. Having said that, you know, the Chinese certainly don't want Korean reunification or, as a consequence, American troops on their borders. So, they will do what it takes to ensure regime survival, and I think the North Koreans also calculate that such this is what the Chinese calculation is. Having said that, you know, the Chinese certainly can turn the screws on the North Koreans if they wanted to.
Okay.
They decide not to do it, that's okay. Politics.
Ambassador Tayal, do you think that if there is a preemptive strike against Pyongyang, will North Korea go out for an all-out war? And what kind of retaliatory attacks would North Korea launch, and against whom?
I'll first revert to your initial question, why should the world be worried about North Korean bomb? In fact, it's a very good question, because North Korea is not aggressive. North Korea is not trying to occupy Japan or try to occupy South Korea or try to attack China. North Korean bomb is only for the survival of its own regime. And Americans feel threatened because they don't want to talk with an equal power which can strike its own land. So, to that extent, world can live with a nuclear North Korea. How will South Korea react? How will Japan react? Whether they will also become nuclear? That is a question which should worry China more than the entire world or India. Okay. So, I would say that the world has to sort of desegregate and see these things. Now, as far as retaliation is concerned, the feeling in South Korean masses is that North Korea is a brother, and eventually it will not use nuclear weapons against South Korean people. It may hit Okinawa, it may hit Japan, it may hit Hawaii, but this is a feeling among the masses. In the recent elections, North Korea was a very minor issue. It is very surprising, but the issue was corruption and social inequality, economic, etc. And that's why the new president of South Korea has even offered to go to North Korea. So, we don't have to see the world from the prism of American perception and American perspective.
Okay. Okay, all right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the challenges posed by nuclear North Korea to the region and to the world. Ambassador Meera, Shankar, is the Korean Peninsula really in the last throes of the Cold War? And to what extent has the United States been able to influence or encourage China and Russia to withdraw whatever political support they give to Pyongyang and put it under pressure?
Well, till now, China has been a reluctant participant in exerting pressure on North Korea. They have used it in a sense as leverage vis-a-vis the US. Whenever tensions with the US rise, they use the North Korean leverage to re-emphasize the importance of China as an international player, the only one able to affect North Korea's behavior.
Even now? Even after the North Korean reaction to
even now, because
sanctions?
Trump has put on the table that he might offer a more favorable trade deal to China if China puts pressure on North Korea, and because he has also talked of unpredictable, nothing is off the table. So I think to that extent, the Chinese seem to be inclined to exert greater pressure. For instance, having taken the decision to block coal imports from North Korea is a significant step which they haven't taken in the past. if they were to stop oil supplies to North Korea, as some of their articles have talked of, it's not nowhere on the horizon as yet, then you'd have a different kettle of fish. But even in the US, there are people who say that the North Korean economy is doing better than it used to. It's growing at 1 to 5%. It's no longer at that basket absolute, starvation levels. And that therefore, another method might be to offer inducements.
Okay, so
combined pressure and inducements.
Let me take that question to Dr. Jabin Jacob. So was President Trump smart to say that he would be prepared to talk to Kim Jong-un if the meeting could result in real progress? I suppose that's what he meant by saying if the conditions were right. Does such an offer mean that US is able to offer or is willing to offer inducements, as Ambassador Meera Shankar said, and make major policy concessions to North Korea if nuclear weapons program was reversed, or if North Korea denuclearized, even if that means no regime change?
Well, I think it is clear that what the approach that the Americans have used so far have not worked with North Korea, right? And I'm not sure whether denuclearization as a condition will bring the North Koreans to the table. Having said that, any offer of talks must carry some inducements. Maybe as a negotiating ploy, the North Koreans might say, okay, we are willing to talk about denuclearization, and they have done it before, except that they have broken their promises. But inducements will have to be offered, and this is what North Korea has been asking for all times, that they need to be on the table, at the table with the Americans one-to-one. And I think that happens, especially with a liberal president in South Korea at the moment. I think even the South Koreans will be on board. Yeah. The problem might be actually from China and from Japan, because actually this undercuts China's role in the region to some extent, right? Okay. And the Chinese, while they have said, okay, you need to talk to the North, they have been telling the Americans that you need to talk to North Korea. I'm not sure that they have actually thought this thing through. What is the effect if the US and the North Koreans get talking?
Okay. Ambassador Tayal, you talked of South Korea's election and the election of President Moon Jae-in. Does his election really complicate Trump's attempt to use a stick first and a carrot later?
I think it will moderate American stand and will make it more realistic, because denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, particularly North Korea, is just not possible. Maximum one can achieve is some kind of a freeze, that they don't go on with this sixth nuclear test, etc. And there the main territory at risk really is South Korea and Seoul. Whether North Korea attacks, artillery they can always use and destroy Seoul. So South Korea has to be on the negotiating table, because it is ultimately they are the most vulnerable.
So let me interrupt you there and ask you whether the six-party talks can be reinvented as five-party talks minus North Korea, and find a way which would be viable and which will be acceptable to Pyongyang.
I think both Japan and Russia in some ways are irrelevant. It should be a four-party talks between South Korea, North Korea, United States and China. Then it could lead to some kind of a freeze and some kind of a lessening of tensions.
Ambassador Meera Shankar, what is the role that China can effectively play? Now, after President Moon's election, do you feel that South Korea and China are now fundamentally on the same page? Both of them want to maintain the status quo. Both of them don't want the situation to move towards a military conflict, which could destabilize whole of East Asia, could affect financial markets. So there are two status quo forces coming together. Do you see that happening?
Well, they may not come together, because South Korea's ties with the US are very strong, and the US has 28,000 soldiers stationed in South Korea, and now their anti-ballistic missile defense system as well. But it will moderate the US position, because they would have to take South Korea's views into account. Now, in terms of possible talks, I think you have one example, and which is the Iran example, where essentially the US roped in Russia, China and Europe, the European countries, along with the US, so that there was a kind of concerted international economic, interaction with Iran, and that sanctions, when imposed, were effective because no one was violating it, since Russia and China were on board. So that is one example, but Trump has called the Iran deal, you know, one of the worst deals, etc. So I'm saying the models they have for talks would be the 6-party talks, the kind of thing they did before the Iran talks, and then for the North Korean regime, actually, if you look at the Libyan example, then that's a very strong reason for not giving up their nuclear weapons.
But let me stick to South Korea and China. Although it seems that they cannot come together, but I'm saying their interests today, are they coinciding or not coinciding?
See, President Moon Jae-in's election works well for China because, you know, it sort of puts him in opposition to Trump to an extent. But let's not go to the extent of saying that South Korea and China can come together, because look, after THAAD was installed in South Korea, the Chinese reacted very strongly. They threatened South Korean businesses.
From different positions, different immediate interests, can they together say, all right, there's no possibility of denuclearization, but maintain status quo?
I don't think status quo means the same thing for the Chinese and for the South Koreans. You see, South Koreans also have a nationalist agenda of reunification and so on, which is not something that the Chinese really want. All the Chinese want at the moment is status quo, in the sense of, okay, South Koreans try and you know, let's have a good relationship with China, or with South Korea and China, and the North Koreans behave. Do not push the rest of the world to greater, you know, activity on the nuclear issue.
All right. Okay, we need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the regional and international challenges posed by a nuclear North Korea. Ambassador Tayal, Ambassador Meera Shankar talked about the Iran nuclear deal and how that came about. Are there any similarities between North Korea's nuclear program and Iran's nuclear program? And are there lessons to be learned by Trump from the policies that forced Tehran to a bargaining table? Or do you think the economies are so different and the vulnerabilities are so different that you can learn nothing from Iran? Iran, after all, had oil. These people have nothing.
As far as the motivation or objective of Iran and North Korea in having nuclear weapons is concerned, it is very similar. They want to protect the Iranian regime in a Shia, Sunni, all kinds of other factors also come in, and similarly the North Korean. But Iranians are not suicidal. They are not willing to place the entire country at the risk of an attack by the United States. So they play their cards in a more canny manner, in a more logical manner, whereas North Korean leader, since he is supreme leader, there is nobody to question him. He is not answerable to anybody.
But he is not irrational.
He is not irrational. There is method to do in so-called madness, and the direction is very, very clear. And at any cost, they like to have this capacity to strike at mainland United States. Nobody can stop them, and whatever United States may say or do.
Dr. Jacob, you wanted to say something?
See, I think the most important lesson from the Iran deal that the North Koreans are going to pick up is that the Americans, you know, will walk back from whatever deal that they struck. And I think this is what is going to bother North Korea. This is what is going to solidify North Korea's insistence on maintaining its nuclear weapons. You know, Kim Jong-un is not an irrational actor. The North Koreans are not suicidal. The North Koreans play this very carefully. They understand the regional dynamics. They know that China's got their back. They know that the Russians have got their back to an extent. And, you know, at the moment, they really don't need to threaten the Americans as much as the American allies, which is South Korea and Japan. And the allies are giving enough brief to the Americans too in this particular issue.
I think the main difference would be that Iran had not yet acquired nuclear weapons capability. So the effort was to make, you know, kind of roll back and freeze before they could, or extend the amount of time that it would take them if they were to restart the program. With North Korea, you already have a state which has tested, you know, 5 times and has also developed missile capability. So the situation is slightly different.
But what I wanted to really ask you was that if I were Kim Jong-un, I would not be looking at Iran. I would be looking at what you said earlier. I would be looking at what the Americans did in Libya. You have the example of Colonel Gaddafi, who denuclearized who went and sat in the lap of the Americans, started sharing intelligence with them for all their West Asian operations. And the moment Arab Spring came and there was opposition to Gaddafi, Americans went in and assassinated Gaddafi. So, hasn't that example demonstrated to the North Koreans that however compliant or a contrite dictator like Gaddafi or even Kim Jong-un might be, when there is opposition to him, the West will step in and finish him off, and then they will do regime change.
Yes, so that is why the North Koreans see the nuclear weapons as the ultimate guarantor against regime change. Of course, it would not, for instance, preempt covert action against the North Korean regime. Yeah. So it's something which remains to be seen, and clearly the the kind of unpredictability of American behavior, both with Gaddafi as well as with regard to the Iranian nuclear deal, where they have questioned and want to reimpose sanctions on other grounds, then I think that would make the North Korean regime less likely to move ahead.
I want to ask you. No, you can make that point. Yeah. But I'm saying that if North Korea were to say, all right, we will negotiate in good faith with the Americans, what guarantees can America give for stability and survival of North Korea? And are there such guarantees, are these guarantees meaningful in this day and age when in the name of right to protect, you can go and invade any country and say that, they're being nasty to, this regime is being nasty to its people, there's genocide and there is mass murder, and therefore we need to go in.
In comparison with Iran, the point to be noted is the factor, the Israel factor, and how Israel really controls the foreign policy of United States and Trump's son-in-law and all that. So there is no comparison between Iran and North Korea. But what kind of regime survival guarantee can be given? It is possible because ultimately China will also become a guarantor in some ways. But as has been said, what was done to Libya and Gaddafi, that is an example before North Korea. So they will not roll it back. They may freeze and demand a lot of concessions and a lot of money and everything just to freeze their nuclear program. But rollback, they will never accept.
Master Shankar, do you think that the Chinese attempt, we talked about it earlier, to threaten tougher sanctions against North Korea will actually succeed in freezing the nuclear and missile arsenals where they are at present? Or do you think that is just a public posture that China is adopting?
Well, they haven't yet done anything on the oil imports. Most
of that you said, but I'm saying that
if they do really say squeeze North Korea on oil imports or very significant, if you take a look at South Africa, where there were international sanctions against the apartheid regime, then it survived for a long time because there were people willing to violate, and because they also mastered technologies, for instance, coal to petroleum technologies, coal to gas technologies. I'm not sure North Korea has that sophistication, and they are more internationally isolated. But the real question is whether China wants to push to that point.
That is what I asked you.
I think they are not, as yet there's no substantive indication that China will be willing to push to the point of a collapse of the North Korean regime.
No, I didn't say collapse. I said
economic
freezing of the nuclear program.
Economic collapse, because that is what would exert the pressure.
See, the Chinese certainly don't want trouble in their neighborhood, and they definitely see the North Koreans as creating trouble. They will push and they will prod the North Koreans, but I think the kind of pressure that they put on the North Koreans is not just economics, it's also political. I mean, Xi Jinping has not met Kim Jong-un until now. He's met with the previous South Korean President Park Geun-hye several times, and that itself was a signal. Now, in the world of communist politics, this is a big and important signal. But Kim Jong-un has reacted by being brazen in his, his activities as far as nuclear issues are concerned. And, the Chinese really don't have an answer to that.
Is the situation going to get worse before it gets better, or do you think we are already moving towards
Well, I don't think the situation is going to get better if you mean if you mean by better that North Koreans are going to denuclearize. That's not going to happen. And ultimately, the Chinese and the North Koreans will hang together. Okay. The Chinese have a certain amount of leverage with the North Koreans, but you know, they will look at the interplay of China-US relations first before they put any pressure on the North Koreans.
We've really run out of time. We could have gone on for another half an hour, but I would like to thank all my guests, Dr. Jabin Jacob, Ambassador Meera Shankar, Ambassador Skand Tayal, for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again as usual next week. Until then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.